Welcome back to Defining Truth, episode 62, where we break through the noise and look at today's headlines through the lens of faith, reason, and reality. Today, we're covering three stories that intersect around one question. What happens when power forgets principle? We're going to talk about the rising conflict with Venezuela, some news on that this morning, a situation which kind of echoes the Cold War. And we're going to unpack the government shutdown a bit and debate over welfare, what's real, what's manipulation, and where Americans have to draw the line. And finally, California's attempt to fix inequality, quote unquote, through a one-time billionaire tax, and why that move might be the clearest picture yet of the Marxist drift in American politics. Let's get into it. All right, welcome back to the episode. I just got to say right off the bat that if you don't see Brandon Jones, who's usually here, that's because our camera went down, so we're having some technical difficulties. But don't worry, I've ordered a new cable from Amazon, and it'll be here soon. Yeah,
the lesson there is don't buy Chinese products.
But you can hear his voice. He's over there across the room, so he'll chime in whenever he wants. But let's jump into the Venezuela tension. So if you didn't see this morning, there was some news about Trump deciding to hit targets inside Venezuela. Okay. So let's talk about this real quick. So in recent weeks, the Trump admin launched a bunch of maritime strikes. You may have seen the videos of them hitting drug running boats in the Caribbean, et cetera. Most of these are right off the coast of Venezuela. So we've hit targets leaving, but not inside Venezuelan territory. And of course, these are trafficking narco boats, bringing dangerous narcotics like fentanyl into the United States. Officials say these operations are part of a broader campaign against narco-terrorism, blending sort of the drug war counterterrorism narratives. You may know that a while back now, the Trump administration designated the cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, which is kind of a blank check when it comes to actions and taking force against them. By the way, I feel like this is a long time coming. It should have happened a long time ago. Years ago, when I was on the campaign trail, we were talking about the 900+% increase in fentanyl overdoses just in the San Diego County area, right there along the border here in Southern California. It's a massive problem that should have been dealt with a long time ago. It's an issue that intersects with a lot of others, like open borders, et cetera, that the Biden administration completely disregarded. Left a lot of Americans vulnerable, and this administration is simply trying to fix that. So I'm all for hitting the narco-terrorist, if you ask my opinion. The details are shifting quickly here. The U.S. insists that these are legitimate interdictions in international waters. Venezuela, on the other hand, of course, they're freaking out. You've seen some of the stuff where they're training local militias, and they're giving guns to housewives, and obviously they are running scared of the Trump administration. And the president there says that these are acts of aggression. Okay, well, I would agree. It's aggressive to drop a missile on a boat. But the question is, are they legitimate or not? The UN just called them extrajudicial executions. But, the UN is hot garbage, so nobody really takes them seriously. This morning, as of today, that is, reports emerged that U.S. military officials have identified targets inside Venezuela, including airstrips, port facilities linked to trafficking networks, etc. Some media outlets claim these strikes could be imminent. Trump publicly denied authorizing attacks inside Venezuela territory as of this morning, saying no final decision has been made. I don't know. We'll see. If I had to guess, probably we will strike targets inside. I don't know why we wouldn't. I think it is responsible and the role of larger nations like the United States to deal with this kind of stuff. We should have learned a long time ago in history that you don't allow the crazies to rise up and proliferate. Previous attempts throughout history at appeasing terrorists and evil men have not gone well. In fact, in the long run, a lot of people suffer because of it. So I'm very pro first strike. As of today, no confirmed strikes have occurred inside, but the stage is clearly set. U.S. Navy's presence in the Caribbean has expanded. Regional tension is climbing, etc. So from an intel perspective, and I mean intelligence perspective, here's what's really happening. Venezuela has become this key transit hub for cocaine and illicit trafficking across the Caribbean. The Maduro regime is broke. isolated. People are starving inside the country. They're leaning on black market networks to survive. Okay, this is where you have Mexican cartels connecting with nation state folks down there in Venezuela. The U.S. sees both criminal and strategic threats here, especially with Russian and Iranian footprints growing in the region. Now, if you don't follow the region, you may not know that the Russians have been down there for a long time. Venezuela has long positioned themselves as enemies of the United States and the free world. His evil dictatorship regime down there has terrorized people for many, many years. All the typical human secularist left-wing nonsense, right? Imprisoning dissidents, no freedom of speech, brutal government crackdowns, murder, etc., fake elections. So this has been a long time coming. And of course, they're friends with the world's troublemakers. Russia has posted a naval presence there going back many years, even hosting troops, etc. And Iran, let's not forget to mention the crazies in Iran. The IRGC has been able to operate there. So Venezuela has positioned themselves as an enemy to the United States for a very long time. So I feel like this is a long time coming. But again, I'm not an isolationist. I believe in proactive defense of the nation, and that includes maintaining allies. We have friends around the world that we should and do help, and it means proactive movements against threats before they happen, not after. Okay. The deeper question is this really about fighting drugs or projecting dominance? And that's my point, because when democracies forget their moral footing, even justified actions start to look like an empire. If you zoom out, okay, this mirrors a pattern. Collapsing states create chaos. Chaos then justifies intervention. Intervention risks escalation. I think it's not as blurred as some would think. I think it's pretty clear that when you're the big dog on the block, you got to act like it. There is undoubtedly a Pax Americana in the world today. It was severely weakened and people suffered because of it under the Biden administration. But as of today, at least, America's back. And this is exactly what the world expects of the world's wealthiest and most powerful nation. We should be proactive. We should stop bullies. We should intervene where it is of U.S. interest. And for all the crazy isolationists out there that are like, America first, you don't even understand what that means. Preventative actions, they are putting America first. Sometimes you have to go and hit the bad guy before he gets inside your living room, if you know where he's at. That's another conversation for a long time. Again, I'm not an isolationist. I believe in our active involvement around the world. It should happen. We should be involved. It makes not only America safer, but the entire world benefits from a strong American military presence and projection of our power. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens there. Again, I think that brutal regimes like this should not be tolerated. I think that liberty and justice should be brought to anyone, and that includes other countries, especially when we have a lot to gain from this geopolitical move. Let me jump over now into the shutdown welfare debate. Brandon, you were talking about this earlier, how, you already see because of the government shutdown that the left is accusing Republicans of, taking welfare from poor people, all the usual false accusations and banter. But let's bring some clarity there to what's actually happening. So here at home, Washington's gridlock has led to another shutdown, and every media outlet seems to have found some tear-jerking story about the loss of welfare payments will hurt families, etc. But let's clarify this and be sober-minded about the issue, because it's very easy to get overrun with emotional 10-second clips on Instagram, and that seems to be the culture that we're dealing with today, right? Where nothing is nuanced. Everything is, well, the government shut down, so Republicans hate poor people. They're ridiculous assertions and conclusions. We see this a lot with questions of Israel lately, and some of the wackos out there who don't seem to understand what maintaining allies and friends around the world actually looks like. And same thing with this. So don't be steamrolled into thinking that just because the government shut down that a particular party hates poor people. That's not accurate to assert. Of course, there are real people who depend on help. We know that. The church, neighbors, the broader moral community have a duty to care for the vulnerable. But government welfare specifically, just let's go off on this tangent for a minute, has a long history of abuse, dependency, and fraud. Now, Brandon, we were talking about before the show today, the sort of origins of this and there was a time, when you go back to the Great Depression, where men were ashamed to stand in line for welfare. They would do anything to earn their pay and get a job. Charity was not looked upon as something that I should readily take. This is a far cry from where we've arrived at today, where you have rampant abuse and fraud. You have gang members who are 100% disabled, collecting fat paychecks from the government every single month. They even get, back pay after they've committed a violent crime. They go to prison, they get out, they get a ton of money to the tune of hundreds of thousands, depending on how long they were in prison. The system is replete with problems. And let's point something out here that happens a lot. Democrats, they abuse and feed off of this dependency. They keep a lot of people in the Black community, the Hispanic communities. They want them on welfare. They don't want them to succeed or grow or get back into work or be self-sustaining. They want them down and dependent, because dependence breeds subservience, and they know that. And their go-to claim is, every time you talk about, well, what if we got people off welfare? They're like, oh, you're a racist. Or they shout some ridiculous notion and they steamroll people on emotions. The end goal of programs should not be permanent dependency. That's not the point of welfare. The point of these systems are to get you back up on your feet, first of all. Second of all, and very important, in America, we do not believe that it is the government's role to give you everything you need and or that you deserve that even. And the fundamental difference here is between human secularists and Christians, for example, is that we do not believe that the government is God. We don't believe that is the role. We're going to get into in a minute the role of government from a biblical worldview, but it's not to give you everything you need, like free healthcare and free education and free food and free this, to the point where you're completely dependent on some massive deity called the government. Of course, the left does push that way. They reject the existence and belief in a higher moral authority, and so government becomes their God, and so they want everything from their God. And anyone that opposes that perspective is all of a sudden, a bigot or evil or racist or whatever, fill in the list of terms they throw at you, but they don't stop to think critically about these issues. From the early expansion of the Great Society programs back in the 1960s to welfare reform battles of the 1990s, we see the same pattern over and over again. The longer assistance lasts, the less incentive there is to escape it. That's just fundamentally true. The more money flows without accountability, California, the more fraud and waste follow. Let's pause there. How much do we think now? I'm not sure if we have an accurate number, but
yeah,
how much did California just suddenly lose or have unaccounted for?
The first reports were $30 billion. I think it's gone up from there.
Over $30 billion?
Yeah, I just want to add something real quick, because as you were talking, I was thinking, the reason this came up is because the left and secular humanists love to look at Christians and conservatives and say, well, the Bible says to feed the poor. So I was kind of thinking, okay, thinking back to biblical times, how did empires in that age handle welfare? And so, of course, you go back to the Roman government. I just did a little research about the welfare system in Rome. I want to go through it. So before about 100 BC, there was no formal welfare system. At some point in, it looks like 123 BC, the reformer Gaius Gracchus introduced the first grain dole. So they were subsidizing grain to citizens at a low price. Later, under politicians like Claudius, it became free. Under the empire, Augustus and later emperors institutionalized it further through the annona, a state-run system that imported and distributed grain. There was around 200,000 male citizens that were on this list under Augustus. But here's the kicker for anybody who thinks that the government has your best interest in mind. The emperors in Rome did not do this out of pure compassion. They were doing it to keep social peace.
Right.
A hungry mob could riot and overthrow a ruler. So there's this famous phrase, and I'm going to butcher it, panem et circumcenses, bread and circuses is what it means. Comes from this idea that the Roman emperors had.
the mob.
Yeah, feed and entertain the people to maintain order. So when people look at the government for these handouts and think that they're doing it just because they're good people, they're not. They're doing it to suppress you.
Yeah.
Because if you're I don't want to make a direct correlation that if you're fed, you're entertained, but basically that is it. The grain dole was both a welfare policy, but it was also a political tool.
Yeah, of course.
To maintain peace. And so, anyways, I just thought it was
no, it's a good point.
Very interesting.
It's a good point because the world without God is devoid of moral goodness. And there's always an ulterior motive, right? We talk about that a lot with leftism, that it's always a struggle for control or power, and they virtue signal. They hide under the guise of moral superiority when really they themselves deny a higher moral authority. So let's be clear, and let's just call out the elephant in the room here. The government is the worst possible entity to manage anything, especially when it comes to billions of dollars. When the Bible talks about feeding the needy and feeding the hungry, that's for you.
Yeah, it wasn't the government doing it.
You're supposed to feed people. So all these virtue signaling leftists, I want to be like, okay, when was the last time you fed somebody? Because last I checked, that's predominantly led by Christian ministries, churches and soup kitchens and programs, and that these are Christians out of good charity and higher moral belief are going out and helping people. That's how America has traditionally done it. It's always been that way. We've never wanted the government to take our taxes and do with it as they please. Why? Because they mismanagement. Perfect example, California, $30+ billion unaccounted for. They don't know where it went. Or like Department of Labor, rampant with fraud during the COVID era because they were so in a hurry to just give out money to everybody, free this, free that we lost tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in fraud. Again, the longer the assistance lasts, the less incentive there is to escape it. That's always been true. And the more money flows without accountability, the more fraud waste follows. We've seen that at every single level. Why in the world would you repeatedly give a government, like in California, completely irresponsible, disgustingly immoral in their actions, and they want more money? If I gave somebody $100 to do a service and they just lost it, and I came back and I said, where's the service I paid you for? Well, we don't know. But you know how to fix it? Give us more money.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
That's their answer. It's insane. So don't ever let the far left stand on these virtue signaling soapboxes and be like, you just need to give more money to the poor. It's like, no, you give more money to the poor.
Yeah.
Because we're doing it on a personal level. It's not the government's role to feed you hand and foot.
Yeah.
The more centralized the system becomes, the more disconnected it is from real human compassion. And that's the result that we've seen not only in the state of California, which is the epitome of left-wing failure, but you see that in what Doge uncovered, right? When this administration came in and they set out to kind of follow the smoke and find out what's going on with all the money, you found ridiculous things like warehouses, empty warehouses being paid $400,000 a month for nothing. The government is replete with fraud, waste, and abuse. And so really, and again, I think we made this point earlier, when you have billions missing, not just millions, billions of dollars missing, it's not just missing. That money's going somewhere. And so when you hear people, soapboxing about, Republicans just want to take food from poor people, really what they're saying is, you're exposing my scam. Those billions of dollars are going somewhere. They didn't just disappear. That's like nation state level quantities of cash going somewhere. And their answer is not to bully you into thinking that they should be, that it's wrong for you to think they should be held accountable. It's asinine. And we're going to go right into this because that's what's next. But first, we've created a machine that prints checks but forgets character. That's a key sort of point in this, is that there's no accountability whatsoever. So you have the gang members and the able-bodied men who are on permanent disability receiving food stamps and free money from the government for the rest of their life. The only thing they get in exchange is they're guaranteed to vote Democrat. That's a problem. So yes, we do see how fragile the system is when shutdowns hit, but and people are affected. Not everyone in that category is scamming the system. There is a small percentage that needs assistance, but the outrage should be aimed not at the sort of temporary pause in government spending, but at decades of a system that rewards idleness and punishes productivity and mistakes dependence for compassion. So, jumping right into California's billionaire tax, the Marxist mirage. Lawmakers are floating what they call a one-time billionaire tax. Now, you brought
hold
this
on.
up
Let's
this
be clear.
morning.
Not lawmakers. This was put on by the United Healthcare Workers
Yes.
Union. So this is a union that is going to decide that they're going to fix California's gross mismanagement.
It'll have to go to lawmakers to be passed.
It's going to go. It's actually going to go onto the ballot to be voted on by voters.
Jeez.
Is what they're doing.
Okay. Good point. And they say it's about fairness and making the rich pay their share. I mean, just talk about like openly being communist now. Let's decode that for a second. So, okay, let's just recap that just for clarification. So basically what happens California has lost billions of dollars and they're trying to find out how to get it back. So in simple terms, they're going to tax rich people to get it back. That's basically what we're talking about here, okay? And California has already lost over 500,000 high-income earners to other states like Texas, Arizona, Florida. Their tax base is evaporating here in California. So instead of reforming spending or regulation or having some accountability, they're targeting successful people themselves. Were you going to jump in and say something?
Well, yeah, I'm just going to read straight from the SEIU's United Healthcare Workers of the West. This is straight from their website. So they're calling it, like you said, the California Billionaire Tax Act. They want to do a statewide ballot initiative to enact an emergency tax on billionaires to save California's healthcare system from collapse. They're stating that there's been massive cuts to federal funding for healthcare that are driving California towards a healthcare collapse. The federal funding cuts will strip roughly $100 billion from California's healthcare over the next 5 years. They're saying that this is going to lead to short-staffed shifts, higher costs and loss of coverage, facility closures, and reduced services. And their solution is, we're calling on California's billionaires to step up and pay a one-time emergency 5% tax to prevent the collapse of California healthcare and, because they always have to throw in an and, K through 12 public education.
Oh, yeah. That's the last thing we want them touching is education.
This would protect healthcare jobs and ensure working people and families can get the care they need. The tax would be paid only by Californians worth more than $1 billion, which is about 200 people who hold a combined wealth of nearly $2 trillion. Just one comment. I was listening to a podcast of several tech billionaires, and basically they think to what we talked about last time. There's been mass mismanagement of California's funds, and now they're going to look for billionaires to basically do a one-time relief. And by the way, this is not based off income. This is based off assets. So as we know, a lot of people have assets
total wealth
that are tied up in real estate, equity funds, stocks. It's not liquid cash. So they're going to take 5% of everybody's assets, not just liquid cash, but assets.
Right. Yeah.
And like these guys said, I mean, who wouldn't vote for this? Because there's only 200 people that are going to qualify. And it's anybody that lives in the state, because they're going to retroactive it after it passes. So from January 1st, 2026 on is when that's going to be retroactive, according to
and to be clear, what that means is if you built a company, you took risk, you created jobs, your stock value went up. So California Democrats think that they're entitled to a cut of your hard work and growth, even if you haven't sold a single share, which is what you're talking about. It's retroactive to the entire wealth.
Your entire net worth. Yeah.
That's not taxation. That's confiscation.
Yeah.
Literally, we started a war over this.
Yeah. Well, Democrats constantly are punishing the achievement of the American dream. Every time we turn around, they're taking more.
Well, and this is where I take it to Christians who think that they can play this balancing act with Democrats as if there's no, as if there's some kind of moral equivalence between the right and the left. There's not. There is a putrid and spiritually dark ideology that the Democrats espouse today that has absolutely no place in a Christian's life. We know this. What communion hath light with darkness? You can't adamantly oppose God's word, his precepts and tenets as the Bible describes, his wisdom, and then also call yourself a follower of Jesus. It doesn't work that way. What it does is it reeks of Marxism, which is inherently anti-theistic. It's anti-God and anti-Christian specifically, because it punishes the very act of creation, the foundational American value that says hard work and innovation are rewarded, not seized. And when you strip that away, you're left with what Marx himself called the redistribution of capital, a fancy term for legalized theft. And Christians should have nothing to do with that. Why? Let's look at the repercussions of this. Okay, even if you say, well, I think the government should pay for everything and everything should be free and yada, yada, yada. Okay, what are they actually doing with it? What's the track record of Democrats using taxpayer funds? So let's see. The trans agenda, the mutilation of thousands of children in this country is abhorrent. It's disgustingly immoral. It's abhorrent to God. As a Christian, that alone should make you walk away from the Democrat Party. In education, they've used it to fuel anti-Americanism, CRT, racism, anti-law enforcement. I mean, they are just the worst at everything. This is what they're doing with your taxpayer dollars. And remember, we don't live in a dictatorship. This is a representative government. We elect these people who then turn around and steal our hard-earned money and spend it in the most morally abhorrent ways possible.
Well, yeah. I mean, the Democrats couldn't spend money properly if their lives depended on it. I mean, it reminds me of the gas tax, which, you know, increases every year. And the whole point of that was to fix the roads. Okay, well, that sounds like a great idea, right? We have the worst roads in America. Yeah. So, okay, we pay 10, 15 cents on the gallon and we're going to tax the roads. Well, the problem is that money goes into a general fund. And so, yes, they're taxing us.
By the way.
Yes, they're taxing us to fix the roads, and then they're doing exactly what you're talking about, which is actually taking that money and going and funding, you know, transgender surgeries and everything else. So the United States does not have an income problem. They have a spending problem. They don't know how to manage the money in which we're giving them.
Well, I think we could go a step further and say they know what they're doing. They're just bad. They're bad people that espouse a very bad ideology.
Worse.
Yeah. Far leftism is a religion. They are zealous in their dedication to their belief system. It's evil is what it is. So I don't even think anymore that we can use the excuse that they don't know what they're doing. It's not so much mismanagement as what's the word I'm looking for? It's waste, fraud, and abuse. It's like purposeful waste of funds. Well, they don't view it as a waste. They're using funds to win an ideological battle, right? To dismantle Western civilization. That's what they use taxpayer dollars for. Every time they talk about education in California is abysmal. It's horrible. The best, highest rated schools are schools like Orange County Classical Academy, right? Extremely good ratings. Great education, smart kids, they're doing it right. And the public school system despises them, as they do many private Christian schools. Why? Because we don't adhere to their world-altering Marxist ideology. Christians have no place in that party. It's inarguable. I challenge anyone who wants to have that discussion. Let's sit down and have it, for sure. The conservative perspective isn't anti-charity or anti-help. Let's be clear. It's anti-control. Freedom, economic, religious, personal, cannot coexist with a government that sees success as a sin and dependency as a virtue. Let's jump into the last topic here, the biblical role of government, justice, order, and the limits and power. I want to bring this up because there seems to be a lot of confusion as to the compartmentalization of God. I see this a lot from churches and Christians who think that politics is separate from theology. This is one of the greatest lies Satan has ever pulled on the American church, that God can be compartmentalized into different areas. So, and the world is perfectly happy with that. Keep God in your church on Sundays and then leave him there and come be a Democrat the rest of the week.
Yeah, well, and the ironic thing is if God was outside the church, which of course we know he is, but if they allowed God to work outside of the church, then the poor people would be fed because
Exactly.
the Christians would do that. They wouldn't have to rely on the government. So there's just a bit of an irony.
Well,
there.
and you should always ask yourself, I think we mentioned this last week, you always ask yourself, is my perspective or view on a particular issue a biblical view, or is it a worldly view? Or you could say, is it God's view on fill in the blank? Immigration, borders, is it God's view on those things? Or is it a progressive Marxist view on those things? And the biggest, and the lie, again, to reiterate this point, is that the world has convinced the church that there is no biblical view on some of these issues. And there is. So before we close, we want to anchor all of this in scripture and theology. If we're going to be critiquing government actions, whether it's strikes in Venezuela, the welfare state, California's tax experiments and theft, we need to understand what the Bible actually says about the role of government. All right, so where do we get that from? The clearest biblical description of government's purpose we see in Romans 13, 1 through 4. And I'm going to read it. This is from the ESV. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. That's talking about the government, okay? So what do we get from these sort of these basic principles here? That government derives its authority from God. It's not autonomous, right? We see this deeply ingrained in the American psyche, in that we believe that our rights and freedoms were granted by God, not the government. The government was there to protect them. Its purpose, the government's purpose, is to restrain evil. You see that on the end where he says that, for he is the servant of God, talking about the government, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. You're to restrain evil, not redefine it. Let's be clear. And it serves God's justice, not man's ideology. Okay, so seeing that, because people are quick to read these verses and be like, well, see, you're supposed to do whatever the communist government tells you. No, let's be clear on these 3 points here. Government derives its authority from God, meaning illegitimate governments are not what this verse is talking about. It's talking about governments that are acting in accordance with serving God's justice. Its purpose is to restrain evil, not redefine or create it. So a government that is conducting evil is not a legitimate authority. And it serves God's justice, not man's ideology. So again, if a government ceases to be good and it begins propagating an evil ideology, it is not a legitimate government. This means the role of the state is moral but limited, okay? The government's supposed to preserve order, punish wrongdoers, and protect the innocent. These are sort of broad schemes here. It doesn't get into the weeds of a lot of issues. When government goes beyond that, okay, think of like large, big government overreach, like what the left promotes today. In other words, government's trying to play God by determining morality, controlling the economy, or engineering equality. It completely crosses the biblical boundary of what government is supposed to be. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, Augustine was around the years 354 to 430 AD. In his work, The City of God, argued that human government exists because of sin. The government exists because of sin, to restrain the chaos that results from our fallen nature. Augustine wrote, quote, "Without justice, what are kingdoms but great robberies?" That's City of God, book 4, chapter 4. A state without moral grounding is merely organized theft. And we have history to show us that that is, in fact, true. Recent history, too. That speaks directly to modern issues like overtaxation, political corruption, and the misuse of public funds. Okay, Thomas Aquinas, 1225 to 1274 AD. He expanded on this, teaching that government's legitimacy depends on its alignment with natural and divine law. And this is what the American founders relied heavily on here. In Summa Theologica 1 through 2, Aquinas says that a law that contradicts God's law is not a law at all, but a perversion of a law. If you remember when I was running for Congress, I talked about this a lot, where I would say that if you've forgotten the reason for the law, right, then the law is just tyranny. If the law is not fulfilling its original purpose, it's tyranny. This is kind of what Aquinas was saying as well. We teach this in a modern sense in the police academies today when we talk about spirit of the law, letter of the law, right? You have to understand the purpose of a law in order for justice to be served. What do I mean by that? All laws have a purpose, something that they are intended to accomplish. or restrain. And if that law seeks to accomplish that purpose, then the law is useless. There's no point to it. Again, our founders drew on this concept when they tossed around our original, national motto that rebellion to tyrants was obedience to God.
Yeah, I think people real quick, they've lost, like you alluded to earlier, the purpose of government. People seem to think that government is who gives you your rights, and our rights come from God. That's what the founders based this entire country off of, and government was there simply to protect those rights. It really comes down to we've taken the opposite of what JFK said, and now people are like, what can the country do for me, not what I can do for my country, right? Which is the opposite of what he said.
Right.
And it's just led to this demonic, unjust idea of what democracy and a constitutional republic is. It's just we've gone so far from where we've come, we've forgotten who we are. Absolutely.
Well, that's because the government tries to legislate immorality, right? In the case of secular humanists or like the Nazis or Democrats today, they try to redefine family and gender or use coercion to enforce ideology. When they do this, they cease to be legitimate in their moral sense. And this is, again, what the founding fathers believed as well. As an example, let's just use this sort of the just war theory or tradition. Augustine and Aquinas developed what's known as the just war theory. I just had a great long conversation with Shabbos Kestenbaum up at PragerU in their studios a couple weeks ago. That's coming out soon. I'm sure it'll be interesting. But we talked about just war theory and use of force from a biblical perspective, things like policing, law enforcement, military, etc. So in the just war theory, Aquinas and Augustine, which laid out the moral criteria for when a nation can rightly go to war. It's just as relevant today as we look at Venezuela and other conflicts. So here's the key criteria. They essentially outline that there is just cause. Okay. This is, again, to be clear, we're talking about the just war theory. When is a government legitimate in taking action like a war or force? Key criteria include just cause. The war must confront real evil or aggression. Right intention. The purpose must be to restore peace, not to conquer or exploit. Legitimate authority, meaning only proper constituted authorities may wage war. This speaks against the radical crazies that pop up and say, like, we should be, we're going to take over the government because we don't like what they're doing. Well, that's not biblical. The Bible says that legitimate authorities take these matters into their hands and make these decisions. Proportionality, which was sort of added later on in this theory, the means used must not exceed what is necessary to achieve justice. And last resort, all peaceful alternatives must be exhausted first. This general outline, you see, guides the American perspective on pretty much everything in that industry. Same thing with law enforcement, right? That's why we have a use of force chart where you escalate, where court later judges will ask you in court, hey, did you exercise peaceful alternatives? Did you offer them a chance to put something down? Did you use less lethal? So we carry this in the American psyche very deeply in our culture. When the U.S. engages in military actions, Christians have a duty to weigh these principles. The moral question isn't merely, is it effective? It should be, is it just? And we should. We should call that out. We should call strikes, strikes, and balls, balls. The government's boundaries are clearly there. The Bible makes clear distinction between the roles of the church and the state. The state, the government, wields the sword, according to Romans 13, protecting order, punishing evil. The church wields the truth. Matthew 28, preaching repentance and moral renewal. These things are not opposed to each other. They don't need to be compartmentalized. They work together because all is God's. When government tries to take over moral formation through indoctrination, coercion, or forced equality, like we see in the public education system today, it is stepping into a domain God reserved for the cautious and the church. When the church is silent, the state will fill that vacuum and morality becomes politicized. That is what we're dealing with today. Churches that say, we don't have anything to do with politics. I just want to talk about the Bible. Well, the Bible talks about politics. And I want to read this again because I could not have said it better. When the church remains silent, the state fills that vacuum and morality becomes politicized. You should ask yourself today as a Christian, have you been convinced by the world that moral issues are politics? That some of these political issues are not moral issues? Good question for you to consider. Today, many Christians are confused about whether government should provide for people's needs or stay out of personal life entirely. The biblical model is actually balanced. There's a government role to provide justice and order, not charity or salvation. The church's role is to show compassion and truth, not wield the sword. And individual believers are called to generosity and stewardship, not dependency. This is America 101, guys. When these roles are confused, societies will decay. All of history proves that. Welfare turns into idolatry. Taxation turns into confiscation. Justice turns into manipulation. Oh my gosh, if that's not what's happening today in America. Again, we drew on these sort of scholarly perspectives from guys like John Locke, who argued that government exists to protect life, liberty, and property. The founding fathers relied heavily on Locke's natural law and concepts. C.S. Lewis warned that the worst kind of tyranny is one exercised for our own good because it never ends. Okay, man, does that hit hard? Because we were talking earlier, what do Democrats do? They appeal to the self, right? You deserve more. You deserve free everything. Take it from those people that have more than you. These are not Christian principles. They disguise them in charity and morality, but in fact, they're very dark and very evil and very anti-biblical to believe that you should covet or desire what your neighbor has. Francis Schaeffer said in his work, A Christian Manifesto, that when the state commands what God forbids or forbids what God commands, civil disobedience becomes not an option, but a duty. Hear, hear. So when we ask what's the biblical role of government, it's this: to serve under God's authority, not above it; to uphold justice, not ideology; to protect life and liberty, not manufacture equality. A government that forgets that truth stops being a servant of God and becomes a rival to him. And that, my friends, is why we define truth, because when the world forgets it, someone has to remind them. We'll see you next time.